Welcome to day 6 of the I4 intervention, and it's going to be a fabulous day, not just because it's Friday, but it is Flourishing Friday. Here is our very own positive change ninja, Josh Vaisman, to walk us through how we can truly flourish in veterinary medicine. Take it away, Josh.
So that you can find a little more of that sustainable fulfillment that you deserve. All right, so let's dive right in. This beardless looking Santa Claus guy on the screen, this is Dr. Martin Seligman. Marty Seligman is a world-renowned psychologist, a research psychologist. One of his big claims to fame in the early 70s, he was part of a group of researchers that sort of, I guess, discovered or uncovered this human phenomena that we know as learned helplessness. Many of you are probably familiar with that phrase. You've probably heard that before, learned helplessness. Certainly, if you've ever done any work in, animal training or behavior, you're probably familiar with that concept. And that's really what sort of brought him to the forefront of research psychology. But later on in life, he actually had an experience that really sent him on a little bit different trajectory. He was out in his yard one day doing some yard work, and something about what he was doing was really frustrating him and putting him in a pretty foul mood. And his young daughter came up to him, probably 4 or 5 at the time, and kind of yanked on his shirt and said, Dad, when I was 3, I was a really big whiner. Like, I whined all the time. But when I turned 4, I decided I'm not going to whine anymore. And if I can learn to stop whining, I think you can learn to stop being such a sourpuss. And it's a pretty cute story. It kind of makes us chuckle, but it really struck him. Somebody who researches human psychology for a living, it made him think that maybe these personality traits, these characteristics that we think are a fixed part of who we are, maybe they're not so fixed. Maybe they're actually more malleable than we give them credit for. And that sent him on a path that eventually resulted in him running for president of the American Psychological Association in the mid-90s. Now, the APA is like the AVMA on steroids. It's the largest professional psychological organization in the world. And he ran for president and was elected by the largest landslide in the APA's history. He ran on a platform built on this statement. You see, Dr. Seligman had realized that historically, psychological research had really been looking at the human experience through the prism of deficit. When things are broken, when things aren't working right, when we're damaged or suffering, what contributes to that? How do we alleviate it to get folks back to a state of functioning? Now, that's really, really important work, incredibly valuable. And, thank goodness that there are passionate, intelligent people doing that kind of work to help us all. And the absence of illness is not necessarily wellness. You can eliminate all the problems in your life and still not be thriving. Put another way, you could be not burnt out at work and not flourishing at exactly the same time. And so he wanted to challenge the field of psychology to start looking at that, looking at the flip side of the coin. Maybe the goal shouldn't just be to go from a -5 to a 0, but what can we do to actually elevate 0 so that we can all get to a state of +5, individually, together, in our workplaces, as communities, and across the globe? And that's where positive psychology really came from. And so he went back to the University of Pennsylvania and he started the Penn Positive Psychology Center along with some of his colleagues, and they got to work looking at exactly those things. And from their work and the work of others, we get this beautiful model for psychological well-being called the PERMA model. So what in the world does PERMA stand for? Well, it stands for positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, achievement, and vitality. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into each of these pillars so we can get a bit of an understanding of what the science suggests does genuinely contribute to sustained improvements in psychological well-being, functioning, and performance. So we'll start here with positive emotions. We often think of positive emotions as things like happiness. And in fact, it's kind of baked into our country, right? The pursuit of happiness is a human right. And certainly that is a worthy pursuit. But I think one of the challenges is that we sort of limit ourselves to just happiness. And the truth is that there are myriad forms of positive emotions that we can experience. Things like gratitude, joy, love and connection, awe, inspiration, amusement, interest, hope, pride. All of these things are positive emotional experiences that we can have as human beings. And the research is very, very clear. If you have any interest in this particular pillar, I'd encourage you to Google the broaden and build phenomena, or the broaden and build theory for positive emotions, championed by Dr. Barb Fredrickson. What we know is that when we experience an abundance of positive emotional states, positive emotional experiences, it has a substantive contribution to our overall sense of psychological well-being. Now, I'm probably not surprising you with that. It's not shocking to hear that the more we feel good, the more we feel good. Of course we do. Dr. Kim Cameron at the University of Michigan, the Ross School of Business. He's sort of one of the founding fathers of positive organizational scholarship that sort of looks at workplace through the prism of positive psychology. He has this kind of funny statement that I think is actually quite apropos. He talks about positive psychology as grandma's advice with empirical evidence. But the empirical evidence is pretty clear. The more that we get to experience positive emotions, the more likely we are to experience a boost to our overall sense of psychological well-being. The next pillar we're going to talk about is engagement. Now, engagement here, I want you to think of engagement in a very particular way. It requires two very special ingredients. Number one, you're doing an activity that you've actually chosen to participate in. So sometimes that means you're doing something that you're excited about, that you're passionate about, that you're super jazzed to do. For me, it's getting into our beehives. My wife and I are backyard beekeepers, and there's something about opening up a beehive and, the smells and the sights and the sounds and watching them do all the work that they do and looking around for the queen. I just get lost in it. I love doing that. But it doesn't have to be that level of passion and excitement, just that you're doing an activity that you have autonomously decided to participate in. There's no force involved. Second ingredient, whatever it is you're doing, it requires a great deal of concentration and focus, i.e., it's not something you can do on autopilot. When we have those two ingredients in place, something really fascinating happens neuropsychologically. You see, the human brain, we know from neuroscience research, is capable of processing massive amounts of information, upwards of 11 million pieces of data every single second. That's how much information is coming into our heads empirically right now, every single moment. But the vast majority of that, I mean like well over 99.999% of that information is being processed subconsciously. The conscious part of our mind can really only focus on, attune to about 40 to 60 pieces of data. So when you're in a state of engagement, when you're doing an activity that you've chosen to participate in, and that activity requires some focus and attention, your conscious mind is completely occupied by what you're doing, which means there's no room left in the conscious part of your mind to think about the horrible client interaction you had this morning, or the double caseload that you've got coming up this afternoon, or the project you have to complete this weekend. All of that melts away. It goes away. So we know that when we get to experience moments of engagement with more frequency, more depth and intensity, longer durations of time, all of that absolutely contributes to our overall sense of psychological well-being and performance. The third pillar here is relationships. We are social creatures. Everybody knows that. That's not a surprise. Even though many of us are introverts, social interaction is important. In fact, it's a base. It's one of our base psychological needs. The sense of inclusion and belonging is incredibly important to all of us for our capacity to thrive. Dr. Chris Peterson, who's one of the founding fathers of positive psychology, unfortunately, we lost him way too early, about 10 or 15 years ago now, actually. He kind of encompassed positive psychology in really just three words. Other people matter. Other people matter. In so many ways, not just psychologically, actually physiologically. When you have a positive interaction with another human being, there's a cascade of beneficial hormones that are released in our body, one of which is oxytocin. Yes, the same oxytocin that's released in massive amounts during childbirth. One of the reasons we call it the cuddle hormone, it contributes to that strong, warm sense of connection and attachment. We get a little bit of oxytocin released whenever we have a positive interaction with somebody else. And there's a mirroring effect. When I get a boost of oxytocin because we're interacting, so do you, and vice versa. Oxytocin has incredible benefits on the body. It reduces, tamps down the impacts or the negative or deleterious impacts of cortisol, boosts the presence of DHEA, increase trust and trustworthiness, teamwork and collaboration. So positive interactions, they're incredibly important to us. In fact, some research out of Harvard University, longitudinal research, following people from early childhood all the way through their life, checking in on them periodically throughout that time frame, has found that probably the quality of our relationships, no, not quantity, quality of our relationships is perhaps the number one predictor of long-term physical health. So, when we get to have more positive interactions with people, deeper positive connections, closer positive relationships with other human beings, profound impact on our overall sense of psychological well-being. The fourth pillar of the PERMA-V model is meaning. You see, the human brain is a meaning-making machine. Part of that is because we're trying to process copious amounts of information. We talked about this earlier. 11 million pieces of data coming in at every moment. Your subconscious mind is constantly sifting through that, trying to make predictions about the environment, trying to quickly determine for us, for the conscious part of our mind, are we in an environment that is probably safe or likely unsafe? In other words, are our needs being met right now, or are our needs being put at risk? That's all happening subconsciously. This is what it feels like, that meaning-making machine. Picture this. You're walking down the street one day, downtown, wherever you live. A couple, 3 blocks out ahead of you, but walking towards you is somebody that you recognize, somebody you haven't seen in several years. Maybe you worked with them in another hospital, and it's somebody that you think fondly of, and you're excited to see them. So you want to get their attention so that you can catch up with them. Now, it's a busy, busy street. It's pretty loud. You're not going to yell to them. They're too far away. But it looks like they've just made eye contact with you. So you wave and smile. And the moment you wave, they make a sharp left turn and scurry up an alley. Now, some of you probably chuckled when you heard that last part, and you didn't really think much about it, but your subconscious mind, as soon as I gave you the punchline of that story, filled in the gap. It made a prediction. It told you why they turned left. Some of you may have thought, oh my gosh, that person probably hates me. Some of you may have thought, oh, maybe they saw somebody behind me they were trying to avoid. Some of you may have thought, it was probably coincidence. They were turning left anyway. The point here is that I didn't tell you why. And all of these explanations are plausible, but your brain can't help but give you a story. That's how the human brain works every moment of every single day. This is an automatic subconscious process that we can't shut off. And the truth is, we shouldn't. It's incredibly important to our ability to survive and thrive as a species. Well, how does it relate to well-being? When the subconscious mind fills in the gap, gives us a story that feels meaningful to us. When we're doing things that we get a sense of meaningfulness from, that has an incredible impact on our overall sense of psychological well-being. In fact, there's some research in human medicine conducted in teaching hospitals with human doctors and registered nurses that suggests that the experience of meaningfulness at work, i.e., I'm doing tasks that feel meaningful to me just 15 to 20% of the time, correlates with the lowest risk of professional and occupational burnout. Meaning is an incredibly powerful contributor to overall psychological well-being. The fifth pillar here is achievement. I like to think of achievement as like accomplishment or mastery. You see, human beings, we don't really like to feel like we're static creatures. Worse, we definitely don't like to feel like we're moving backwards in life. We want to feel like we're moving forwards, progressing, learning, growing, a little bit better version of myself today than it was yesterday. So when life offers us some sort of tangible evidence that we are achieving, that we are accomplishing, we are growing, I'm one step closer to mastery. That also seems to have a very profound impact on our overall sense of psychological well-being. And then finally, we have the vitality pillar. It turns out that how we take care of our physical body is also very, very important for our psychological wellness. This is things like sleep hygiene, nutrition, activity. All of these kinds of things are also incredibly important. And we see very strong correlations between how we self-care and how we mind care. So all of these things seem to play a role. thus the PERMA-V model for psychological well-being. And we can see pretty consistently, we can actually measure PERMA-V scores. And we can see that when we get a boost to any one of these pillars, when people report having an abundance of positive emotion, we see all of the PERMA-V scores go up and their overall sense of psychological well-being and performance increases. Certainly, when there's a boost to multiple pillars, it has an even more compelling impact. So I wanted to leave you with a tool, something that you could use to empower you to both consider where you're at now, set a target for where you'd like to be, and then start taking that journey. So this is one version of how you could do this. What you see on the screen right now is something that you could just draw on a piece of paper, or I'll share a copy of the slides with Alyssa and Caitlin and anybody who wants to request it, or you could just request them from me directly. The last slide will have my email address, and then you could just print this out and do it. But basically what you want to do is you want to draw out somehow all the pillars of PERMA-V, and then you want to draw a scale of 1 to 10. And then what I'd like you to do after you draw your PERMA-V pillar is just think about, generally speaking, say over the last 30 days, where do you feel like you're at? Do you feel like, man, I've just been experiencing an overabundance of positive emotions for the last 30 days? I'm probably a 9 out of 10. You know, I have had a few opportunities to really get into that state of engagement, but not as many as I'd like. I'm a 4 out of 10. Go through all of these and just give yourself an honest, candid score of where you think you're at. Then what I want you to do is pick just one pillar. One pillar, whether it's the one with the lowest score, the middle score, even the highest score, it doesn't matter. I want you to think about which one of these pillars, if I made a 1-point improvement, would have a profound impact on my overall sense of thriving in life. Just one, circle that one. And then what I want you to do is write down what are 1 or 2 very small things, truly achievable things that you can commit to, put on your calendar, and actually do over the next 7 days that will help you boost that pillar by just 1 point. I'm not asking you to get to 10 out of 10 in all 6. I'm asking you to pick one pillar that you want to boost by 1 point and pick 1 or 2 very small ways to practice doing that over the next week. That's it. We find that when we can do these kinds of practices routinely, once a month, once every 2 months, over time, we see this cumulative impact that results in an incredible boost to our overall sense of psychological functioning. All right, so today, in a very brief amount of time, we learned about positive psychology. We explored the PERMA-V model for psychological well-being. We played a bit with a PERMA-V boosting exercise. My friends, I am so grateful to spend this Flourishing Friday with you. Thank you once again, Alyssa and Caitlin. May your PERMA-V be full. May you go forth and thrive in your life and work.